In this video, I'm going to tell you the top 5 reasons for getting a direct drive force feedback wheel. Make yourselves a cup of tea, and whatever you do, don't subscribe to this channel because it will make your life worse. Let's get on with it. Direct drive wheels are smoother than a Michael Jackson moonwalk because, unlike non-direct drive wheels, the direct drive wheel is literally the motor and you are in control of the motor. You're feeling the motor directly. The wheel rim is on the shaft and the shaft is the motor. When you've got belt wheels like a T300, CSL Elite, or even wheels like the Logitech G293, which uses 2 motors with cogs that go something else, your motors are separate from the actual thing that the wheel attaches to. So with the belts or the cogs and everything going on, there's going to be degrees of mechanical dampening, degrees of inertia from the actual motor system, and it's just not going to be as smooth as a wheel attached directly to the servo motor. Now, each servo motor does have its own feel, so it's not completely 100% smooth. Occasionally there's a little rut on the stage as Michael Jackson's moonwalking, but relative to anything else, a direct drive wheel is hyper smooth. If you're using larger wheel rims as well, you're not going to feel nothing. It's going to be so smooth, you're not going to believe it. Now, the reason why that is important is because if your input is totally smooth with no cogging variation, that allows you to be more precise with your input. It also means that ignoring the force feedback and anything that the wheel is putting out, you have nothing to get in the way there. It is entirely you and the input into the video game. So a common misconception with direct drive wheels is that, you have to run them at really high strength to get the most out of them. Well, no, just as a basic input device, with the force feedback turned off, it is the smoothest, most concise, most precise method of inputting into a driving video game or driving simulator. So direct drive, you can't get smoother than that. Now, the best way to think about this is probably through the analogy of sound, or specifically speakers. Your belt-driven wheels, or like your G293s, cogs, belts and all this other stuff going on in the wheel, they are much more analogous to if you were to go to Amazon and buy some £5 USB plug-in speakers. You'll be able to hear the song, you'll be able to sing along to it and even dance to it if that's what you like to do. But only if you have a decent sized speaker or a nice bookshelf speaker and a nice amplifier, the voltage to drive that speaker decently, will you be able to hear all the mid-range details, the full vocality of a singer, and the suffering in the voice box of modern singers that are forced to sing terrible music, or maybe a rapper. You'll be able to hear the specific auto-tune struggling to auto-tune modern rap artists. You'll be able to pick up all those little details, but you'll also be able to hear chest-pounding bass with your chest pounding from the bass, as well as little hi-hats, and it'll all be there on a proper speaker with no ambiguity, unless maybe you're totally deaf, which a lot of people probably are based off modern music. But with a decent speaker, there's a lot more range there. You know what I'm saying? Whereas a tinny £5 speaker, it sounds like a 1950s Hindenburg commentary. Not good enough. That is kind of what it's like with the force feedback wheels, in that your lower end wheels are a bit tinny, a little bit muted. You can still hear the song and you can still drive perfectly fine with it. But with a direct drive wheel, the range is such that you can have really strong force feedback or informative force feedback whilst you're going through a corner, but you can then still feel like the grip fall off a little bit, or the back of the car rotate a little bit, or a grain of sand as you drive through Zandvoort and go off-road. You just feel a lot more detail. There's a lot more resolution there in the force feedback. It could get really technical if I was to explain this properly, but I'm too thick to do that, and this video would be too long. So reason number 2, higher resolution force feedback. A DD wheel will blow your nipples off. That's all you need to know. So if you've ever done drifting in a non-direct drive wheel, you will have inevitably found yourself in a situation where the wheel just can't keep up with the simulator. The nice thing with a direct drive wheel is that even if you're going from 900 degrees lock one way to 900 degrees lock the other way, it will have the speed of rotation to always stay 1-to-1 with the sim, allowing you to basically drift in many ways as you would in reality, and do really nice things like just let go of the wheel and let it thread through your hands and then grip onto it at the right time. You can still drift with non-direct drive wheels, and there's ways to get around the slower rotational speed, running a lower wheel lock or increasing the sensitivity so the wheel doesn't have to move as much for it to still stay in sync with what's going on in the game as a compromise. But the thing with a DD wheel is you can pretty much set it up as you would want to have it set in reality. Is 1-to-1 with things, and it will all operate as it should do, as best is currently technologically possible with the current simulation software. Outside of monster drifts and monster wheel rotations, you also have situations with faster cars, formula cars, or even something like a Radical, even something like a GT car. You'll have situations where the wheel will suddenly go from 20 degrees one way and suddenly want to go 20 degrees the other way, or even less than that. And you have sudden snaps that occur with real steering wheels, and situations with the simulated vehicle where it will suddenly snap quickly. And again, the non-direct drive wheels just can't keep up with that type of movement. They don't have the rotational speed to stay 1-to-1 with the sim, even with very quick small movements that are super snappy. A direct drive wheel can do that. And finally, on the rotational aspect of it, there's a very common situation with real cars that don't have power steering and typically have much stronger torque in reality, where sudden suspension compressions cause a wheel to suddenly jolt a little bit but then just reset immediately afterwards. Those jolts can actually be quite a lot of rotation. You're not reacting to it, it's merely a quick sudden jostle on the suspension with the car. With a DD wheel, it can do that and correct itself in the perfect position and be totally fine. Whereas with non-direct drive wheels, you typically, the wheel just won't move at all, because it just doesn't have that innate initial movement speed or ability to even have that go through the whole wheel system and come out to the steering wheel in any way that makes sense. So wheel rotation, fast rotation for drifting, fast rotation for quick catches and snaps. A direct drive wheel or direct drive wheels are the only real way to capture that properly, perfectly, and nipple shakingly. So really nicely, because a direct drive wheel has so much dynamic range in terms of the force feedback fidelity, it means that you have an ability to adjust the force feedback that you get from the wheel without it removing force feedback that you need to inform you from the game what the car's doing. So, for example, if you have a simulator that doesn't have like a properly programmed gyroscopic effect on the tyres, or it's the game is just overreactive force feedback, so it's unrealistically snappy, God knows what, developers seem to just take a lucky dip when they do force feedback with driving sims. If you have a game that's not quite how you want it to be with the DD wheel or with your force feedback wheel, with a direct drive wheel you can maybe add a bit of dampening to calm it down, increase the amount of filtering to remove any graininess that might be coming out of a sim that has a low tick rate for the force feedback. A DD wheel will allow you to add dampening, add some filtering, but because it has that range there and the speed and the actual detail there, doing that won't negate the underlying force feedback and the details that you want to actually feel. So you can set it up more to your preference without losing too much from the actual simulator. Whereas if you're not using a direct drive wheel, such as a T300 for example, which is a fantastic wheel, what you'll find is if you start putting dampening on that wheel, or increasing filters and things, you are losing proper details that you need, or you're losing rotational speed from the wheel, or you're losing something else that's, you're already under what's really required from the wheel for it to stay one-to-one with the sim. So a DD wheel just allows you way more wiggle room to set the wheel up how you want to set it up. Also, you have the fact that, most people that are playing driving simulators at home are not actually using them as a simulator in the sense that they're going to go and drive that real car and they're using it as a training tool directly. They are doing it for entertainment. So using the force feedback wheel, you could run maybe higher force feedback than is realistic for that car to emulate the sense of G-load, and feeling that extra force through the wheel can be in many ways analogous to that sort of G-load in a Formula car through a corner. So you could set the wheel up so it's much stronger than it really should be realistically in a literal sense, or you can set it up a lot weaker. It's entirely up to you, and again, the range of that adjustment is just unparalleled, mostly due to the dynamic range, but also due to the settings on the different direct drive wheelbases. It's just unparalleled compared to what you get from your non-direct drive wheels. And for me, actually, that range of adjustment is a really big aspect of a direct drive wheel. You don't need to run them crazy high. You can just set it up to how you want, and you can just have a good time with it and enjoy your equipment and your driving simulators how you personally want to enjoy them. Fantastic. Stronger force feedback without clipping. So I've left this last because this seems to be where people get confused, in that I think people see DD wheels and they think, oh, it's just about it being stronger. I don't want my force feedback to be stronger. Really strong force feedback, even if it's realistic, makes you slower. Oh, DD wheels are stupid. It's kind of missing the point. So again, it kind of goes to point 4. If you have the stronger force feedback there available, you can actually choose when you want to use that. But having it there, if you do choose to use it, means you can emulate either real-world steering wheels, so like that have strong force feedback in reality, so like a GP2 car or F2 cars. I think they've got power steering now, but they didn't used to. So the Indy cars, vintage cars, there's loads of real-world cars where they actually have 15, 20, 30, 40, 60 Newton meters of power output. If you wanted to emulate that directly, you would need a direct drive wheel to get that one-to-one super strong, super heavy steering. I don't think many people actually sim racing would want to do that most of the time because your wrist would hurt, and so most people will run them slower, but at least it's there as an option. Additionally, the really strong force feedback, as I kind of alluded to earlier, does allow for that suspension sudden jolt movement, which you only really get if you run it at very high force feedback strengths. That sort of component, someone might want to capture that from the force feedback, especially if they do a lot of vintage racing, where just because you're running it at very strong force feedback doesn't mean you're really wrestling the wheel necessarily. One of the things you find with the direct drive wheel is actually eradicates some of the bad sim racing habits that you get. If you drive with low powered sim racing wheels, you'll find that you tend to drive a lot of you'll push and pull with your hand, or you push and pull with both hands, whereas in a real car and a go-kart for stamina and not damaging your wrists, you generally only want to be pushing. You should push with your left or push with your right. You're not pulling because of the way it pulls on your hands. And you'd in many cases allow the car to drive itself, and that you then sort of allow the car to do what it's doing, but then you work with the car, and that really captures that sort of joy of driving where you really feel like you're really understanding the innate nature of the machine, the physics object that you're manipulating, because you're working with it as opposed to sort of driving over the top of it. With the lower end non-DD wheels, driving over the top of the car is kind of the default way to drive, which so personally I did a lot of sim racing with a G25, and then the first time I went go-karting, I was like, Jesus Christ, my arms have fallen off, which would probably happen anyway if you've got weak arms, but a large part of that is because I was trying to overdrive the go-kart, and you don't need to. you have to work with it. DD wheels, when set up correctly, if you choose to run them at higher force feedback or analogous force feedback, you'll tend to get more into that frame set of working with the car, using the brake and the accelerator, and then using the steering appropriately to drive the vehicle, letting the vehicle drive itself a bit, as opposed to you driving over the top of the car. Now, that might be slower for esports. Driving over the top of the car might actually be a better way to get those last fractions of time, and especially if you're Guitar Hero driving in a hot lap competition, force feedback really isn't going to be that important when it comes to someone doing 15, 20, 100 hours of a single lap, exactly the same conditions. You know, that's kind of much more on a gamey approach, which is totally valid and a perfectly fine way to drive, and you will still benefit from a DD wheel because you can turn the force feedback down, it's smoother. Yeah, it's the strong force feedback allows you to just capture elements of how real cars respond in their steering much more than what you could ever get from a non-DD wheel that doesn't have that force feedback strength. So, you know, those are the top 5 reasons as to why you should get a DD wheel. I would say, again, I want to reiterate this, if you can perfectly enjoy sim racing with, I really like the Logitech G25, it's now the G293, they're a little bit pricey, but hopefully the price will come down. I really like the Thrustmaster T300, absolutely fantastic, and I really like the Fanatec CSL Elite. They are all great wheels that all allow you to drive perfectly fine, and they, if your objective is fast lap times in esports, all that equipment is totally fine. It's you that's crap, not the wheel. So, you know, but DD wheels, they just give you more options. They just make things more exciting, and so that's why you might want to get a DD wheel. Just don't feel pressured into getting one. But if you do feel pressured into buying sim racing steering wheels, then of course, if you're going Fanatec, feel free to use my Fanatec affiliate link in the description. And if you go with Thrustmaster, use my Amazon affiliate link in the description. And that allows me to make more of these terrible videos that ruin your life. Let me know any questions in the comment section, guys, and I will probably do a follow-up video. We can maybe address some other nuances and aspects of direct drive wheels that people are confused about, or maybe someone just wants to shout at me. That often happens in the comments. But until the next one, I hope you found this video useful, enjoyable, exciting, and yes, happy tea drinking. Goodbye.